A wild day on Wall Street. Still, the stock market is continuing to fluctuate at this hour, with the Dow attempting to regain some ground after a record-setting dive. Yesterday, it dropped by more than 1,100 points, the largest single-day slide in history for the Dow, wiping out all 2018 gains. We'll continue monitoring the markets, bringing you a detailed update later in the hour with my friend next to me here on the couch. Another Fox News alert here. The growing conflict in our nation's capital over two memos. The House Intel Committee voted unanimously now to release the Democratic memo on the FBI surveillance practices. Democrats say it counters the GOP version, which came out last Friday. Now it's up to President Trump to decide whether it will allow or whether to allow its release or not. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today, co-host of After the Bell from Fox Business, Melissa Francis, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, former deputy spokesperson for the State Department and Fox News analyst Marie Harf. Joining us today in the center seat, Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano, an iconic laugh and perspective that we enjoy all the time.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I mentioned the Dow and how we'll break it down with you later this hour. I can't wait to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is because of growth. Remember, nobody's forecasting recession. It's because of good news. That's why the market went down. That's my one thought for you.
All right, and then we'll wait another 20 minutes to get the rest.
Okay.
Okay. Because in 20 minutes from now, the market will be lower than it is.
Oh,
well, that's okay.
Okay, we'll move on.
Don't worry about it.
President Trump now has 5 business days to decide what to do about that Democratic memo on the FBI surveillance. Democrats wrote it as a rebuttal to the Republican memo that came out last week. The House Intelligence Committee voted unanimously late yesterday to release it. Ranking member Adam Schiff has some concerns about what will happen next.
I think it's going to be very hard for the White House, like it was hard for the Republicans on our committee, to block release of this. I am more concerned that they make political redactions, not redactions to protect sources and methods. And that's why we're going to insist that the Department of Justice and the FBI report to us on what redactions they think are necessary so that we can segregate any political interference from the White House.
The White House says in a statement the Democratic memo will be handled the same way the Republican memo was handled. Meanwhile, House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes is defending the Republican memo, blasting Democrats this way. Watch.
We have a clear link to Russia. You have a campaign who hired a law firm, who hired Fusion GPS, who hired a foreign agent who went and got information from the Russians on the other campaign. It seems like the counterintelligence investigation should have been opened up against the Hillary campaign when they got a hold of the dossier.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill for us. Mike?
Harris, good afternoon. Now that 10-page classified memo is being reviewed at the White House in the same fashion that the original Republican memo was studied last week, and it's up to President Trump to determine over the next 5 days whether he has objections to its release to the public. A source who has read the Democrats' memo tells my colleague John Roberts that it is filled with sources and methods taken from the original documents. That source tells Roberts this was done tactically to force the White House into either denying release of the memo or significantly redacting it. Earlier, House Speaker Paul Ryan made the case for transparency if possible.
What you see here is Republicans are for letting all of this information out there, provided that we scrub for sources and methods. The Republican memo was written to make sure that sources and methods were not compromised so that full disclosure could occur. We do not now know whether that's the case with the Democrat memo. It has to go through that scrubbing process.
Top Republicans on the intelligence panel, Devin Nunes and Trey Gowdy, are acknowledging the FBI disclosed in a footnote there was political bias in its application to surveil former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. Nunes said a footnote saying something may be political is a far cry from telling the American people that Democrats and the Clinton campaign paid for dirt that the FBI used to get a warrant on a U.S. citizen to spy on another campaign. Gowdy says he read the footnote, but it took longer that way than just saying the Clinton campaign and DNC paid for it. A key Democrat weighed in earlier today on Fox's America's Newsroom.
Ours bolsters the credibility of the FBI to point out that they actually did go through the correct process, that a voluminous amount of evidence was presented to the FISA court, that they mischaracterized Andy McCabe's testimony to our committee, also that they did disclose to the court that there was a political motivation of one of the witnesses in a much larger package that was submitted.
A unanimous vote last night in the House Intelligence Committee may have surprised some Democrats after they voted against releasing the Devin Nunes Republican memo. Harris?
Mike Emanuel, thank you very much for setting it up with the facts. So, Judge, I didn't miss what Adam Schiff said. He said that, I hope that it's redacted along political lines and not for, anything that would expose our national security. Why should there be anything like that in there? There wasn't anything like that in the Republican memo.
There was a source and method which was highly embarrassing to the FBI because it was an unlawful one. You had to read between the lines to see it. This has already been reviewed. Sure. It's a three-word phrase in the Republican memo, which refers to Christopher Steele as a longtime FBI asset. That violates an agreement between the American government and the British government not to recruit the agents of the other side. If it occurred before 2009, it was espionage because he was a British spy at the same time he was an American spy. That phrase is what Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, and Rod Rosenstein, the number 2 person in the DOJ, lobbied for a week to get Devin Nunes to excise. Just that 3-word phrase describing him, a long-time FBI asset. We don't know. Congressman Nunes has not been confronted with this, but it's caused a major headache on both sides of the pond. So you see, sources and methods can sometimes not be apparent to people without a background knowledge of it.
How could all those attorneys, everybody looked at that and didn't catch it, or what?
They knew it, but they decided to keep it in there.
Right.
The question is why, and I don't know the answer.
Can you answer Devin Nunes' question? Because that one has me very puzzled. It seems like there was for sure somebody colluding with the Russians, and it was Hillary Clinton's campaign. It was the DNC, as they hired Fusion GPS and they recruited a Russian agent to write the dossier.
That is a brilliant summary by Devin Nunes of why Bob Mueller needs to expand his investigation to see if the influence of the Russians not only came through Donald Trump's campaign, but through Mrs. Clinton's campaign as well. For all we know, he's looking there and we don't know about it because his investigation is largely
But there isn't any question that dossier came from the Russians.
But there is a difference. Can I just jump in here for a second?
Well,
there's
hold on.
There's a
Let's let the judge just answer that one part because you had a bubble over your head.
The dossier was prepared by Chris Steele, former British MI6, the equivalent of their CIA. And he obviously had Russian sources. If you read the dossier, put aside the salacious Moscow hotel room part, the rest of it accuses then Mr. Donald Trump of very, very, very serious money laundering involving Russian mobsters and Kremlin officials. It's never been verified. It's never been vouched for by the FBI, even though Chris Steele was an FBI asset who was being paid by the FBI at the time he was preparing this dossier.
So they may not be guilty of colluding with the Russians because he may have been lying about the whole entire thing. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Well, there's also, I think, a difference. The collusion that they're looking into on the Trump campaign, whether or not anything comes from it, is whether Trump campaign officials worked with Russian government officials or officials linked to the Russian government in their attempt to meddle in our election. There's I think, difference in the intelligence world between having a subsource that may be a Russian citizen, and in terms of the collusion or conspiracy to collude, that may be a legal difference. But the bigger point here is that the FISA warrant, and we can debate whether FISA should be in place or not. I know you have strong thoughts on that. There's no indication that the FISA warrant was gotten in any improper manner under current law.
Even though it depended on something that they knew was paid for by the opposition political party?
There were multiple pieces of evidence in this FISA warrant.
So again, you're pointing out legality versus perhaps morality, professional morality or political morality.
Well, are you accusing the FISA judges of being immoral by approving this?
No. I'm just saying that in terms of what was brought to them, they didn't get to see the total picture. I'm talking about the process to get there.
They knew there was political.
They didn't know who paid for it. They didn't know who paid for it. And that's the morality base that I'm talking about.
Here's the problem with the process. You have a court that meets in secret, and there's nobody there on the other side. As a result, there's nobody to challenge these things. As a result of that, this court grants north of 99.9% of all applications. I have never heard of a court that grants that high a percentage of applications.
But I think what the judge had mentioned earlier is the underlying concern for many here, and the fact that the dossier is unverified and it has not been corroborated. And Andrew McCarthy has a great write-up in the National Review talking about how Christopher Steele's sources are third and fourth-hand accounts, and that even he himself, in cases that have been brought against him, has said that he can't verify the sources that he used and the information that he used in his own dossier. So I think that's the underlying concern. And another big concern, and something I've been thinking about in all of this as well, is the fact that if Hillary Clinton had won, would we even be talking about Russian meddling? Would Adam Schiff care about Russian meddling in the election? Would this be being investigated by Congress? Would the media even care about all of this? And I think if your answer is no, that in itself should be troubling for a lot of people.
Is it okay for President Trump then? If this is all okay, can President Trump do this in 2018? Can he go and hire Fusion to gather unverified, very bizarre evidence on someone that may or may not be true, and then bring it to a FISA court and go listen in on the other campaign?
Well, but he's the president, though. So
right. Hillary Clinton wasn't president. Yeah. But look, the FISA court...
It was the FBI under President Obama.
I do want to get to Carter Page, though, because he's at the center of the Republican memo, and he was asked on Laura Ingram's show last night, you know, what about this trip to Russia, which may have tipped some things into motion? And he said this.
I got it. I think going to Moscow in July 2016, that you're just setting yourself up for scrutiny. I mean, did someone in the Trump campaign, did they okay you going? Did you ask them?
Yeah, I gave them a heads up, and they said, you know, it's fine to go, but you're have nothing to do with the Trump campaign as part of this. And you know, it's fine. There was no go for it. You know, again, I was an informal, unpaid advisor.
Two comments. Laura is exactly correct and right on the mark. You go to Moscow, you brag about going to Moscow. You're working for a campaign at that time. He was not working for the campaign at the time the surveillance started. Right. Trump's people had gotten rid of him. You're putting a big target on your back, and he ought to have known that.
Well, and potentially anybody that... What?
I mean, maybe he wanted to. To me, it seems like somebody, forgive me, who wants attention.
Yes.
I mean, when he's talking about he's an informal advisor to the Kremlin, an informal advisor to President Trump, then he tells GMA that he never texted, emailed, or ever spoke to President Trump. He's talking about these classes he took. You know, when I watch this and he's smiling through all these interviews, it seems like somebody who is trying to draw a ton of attention to himself and may have had nothing to do with anybody.
There are 4 warrants on him. The first is based on the dossier and whatever nonsense they gave the FISA judge. The second is based on what they heard in the first. The third is based on what they heard in the first and the second. The fourth is based on what they heard in the first 3. So whatever they're listening to him saying, it's feeding their FBI and DOJ basis for getting another warrant, because these warrants have a shelf life of 90 days. You got to keep renewing them.
So which is why yesterday I said it would be, no matter how redacted it is, perhaps helpful for the American public to see supporting evidence in all of this. We'll see what happens. We continue watching the Dow Jones. We'll watch it now if they pop it up on the screen. It's been a turbulent couple of days on Wall Street.
Look at that, positive territory.
Yeah, really all last week, too.
When we sat down here, it was down by 300 points 13 minutes ago.
You know, I mean, joy brings joy. Is that what we're saying? Well, what we can expect from the markets and the economy overall, we'll talk about later this hour. And a new report that President Trump's attorneys have advised him now to reject a potential request for an in-person interview with Robert Mueller's investigation of the Russian contacts or any collusion with the Trump campaign. The judge is agreeing with this. He doesn't want the president to sit down. I've heard you say it. Will the president and his team comply? And would there be fallout if he did not sit down with Mueller?
Are you going to talk to Mueller? I'm looking forward to it, actually.
Do you have a date?
There's been no collusion whatsoever. There's no obstruction whatsoever. And I'm looking forward to it.
That was President Trump 2 weeks ago, seeming optimistic about a potential sit-down interview with special counsel Robert Mueller's team as part of its Russia investigation. Since then, Fox News has reported that President Trump's lawyers were leaning against the idea. They worry the president could get caught in a so-called perjury trap. And now a new report, they have advised the president to reject a possible request for a sit-down with the special counsel. If denied an interview, Mueller could subpoena the president to testify before a grand jury, prolonging the probe. So, Judge, the last time we were on the show together, you had mentioned that Michael Flynn, you believe he got caught in a perjury trap.
Yes.
Do you think that President Trump is subject to the same fate?
Yes, I do. I think even more so. The president, who, being diplomatic, does not always use an economy of words and has strong opinions on so many things, is likely to get in a Q&A with his interrogators, who might be Bob Mueller or might be FBI agents, which will get him in trouble. So look, they could limit the scope of this conversation just to one topic. But if the president's answer veers off that topic, then the questioner can ask about the answer. And the president is not always disciplined when it comes to answering. So the standard advice is, you don't talk to a guy who owns a grand jury, and Bob Mueller has too, meaning he can take what you said that contradicted other things, present it to the grand jury, and get you indicted for lying to the FBI, which is what happened to Papadopoulos and Flynn.
So what options then does Mueller have on the table to utilize? Let's say President Trump says, I'm not going to sit down with you to the advice of counsel. Then what does Mueller do?
Okay, so now it flips. Bob Mueller wants to interrogate the president because he wants to know what his thinking is. He also doesn't want to put the president before a grand jury without knowing what the president's going to say. So if the president doesn't agree to the initial interview, question, will Bob Mueller subpoena him before a grand jury having no idea what the president will tell the grand jury? That's a dangerous environment for Mueller.
Well, it is, and I would imagine it would be Mueller's last resort. So what are some of the other dance moves that we can see him try between that and a subpoena? Would he agree to maybe a short time, an hour or two with the president? Like, what are some of the other things he might offer
I would
up?
think that the president's lawyers are trying to negotiate an interview limited in duration and limited in subject matter. And they will try to prepare the president for the interview by persuading him and talking.
And maybe writing the rest of it out
short
in terms
answers.
of written questions.
I think written questions is not going to be helpful because basically the lawyers will write the answers to those questions. If Bob Mueller has gaps in his case against the president, whether it involves a conspiracy to help the Russians hack Hillary, or whether it involves obstruction of justice, those gaps can be filled by the answers President Trump gives in the interview. That's why he should never, ever, ever submit to that interview.
Well, and Melissa, isn't the president sort of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't? Because let's say, he doesn't want to sit down with Mueller, then the left and the media are going to say, well, he has something to hide. He said that he was going to. So where does the president go from here?
I mean, if it were me or a member of my family, I wouldn't go. Even if I knew I was innocent, I wouldn't go. I would do everything I could not to go unless I was forced to go, and then you're forced to go, you got to go. But I think that he covered himself a little bit with that soundbite we just heard. I mean, I sort of interpret that as, I'm going to go, I'm absolutely willing to go, and then later he could say, my lawyer told me not to. I want to. I told you I wanted to before. So that's kind of how I read that,
but the optics of that, I mean, for a president and a team who have said over and over and over again, there's no collusion, there's no obstruction, we have nothing to hide, we're totally innocent. It's not just going to be the left, I think, that says, oh, if you're totally innocent, why aren't you coming forward and answering questions?
If you have a brain in your head, you're not going to go and sit down and make yourself vulnerable even if you haven't done anything.
Bill Clinton as president had to do it. No, they negotiated. They came to the White House.
I don't think anybody's holding their breath on what a former president had to do.
There's
a precedent
for a sitting president under investigation being interviewed.
There's also polling out there that shows that I believe it's north of 70% of people had said that they would like to sit down, like to see the president sit down with Mueller. So you saw the president, not just in this one soundbite, but really over the course of the last week or two, say, absolutely want to. If you've ever been involved in any sort of legal case, it's fine if your attorneys tell you that's what you're paying them to do. They're supposed to tell you what's best for you.
Let me suggest that the president has such self-confidence in his ability to deal with the political side of this. He should defer to his lawyers on the legal side. He's got to protect his political flank and his legal flank. Well, he can deal with the political flank, let the lawyers deal with the legal flank.
We're going to leave it there, Judge. Thank you for your insight on that. All right, well, House lawmakers planning to vote soon as today on a stopgap plan to keep the government funded. A top Democrat warns the bill is dead on arrival in the Senate. So with Thursday's deadline approaching, who will take the blame if we get another government shutdown? Plus, another volatile day on trading on Wall Street after the Dow's nearly 1,200-point plunge yesterday. But the White House saying we have to see the big picture when it comes to the economy. Stay tuned.
This Fox News alert now. Fox News can confirm, well, we all can, can't we? A showdown on Capitol Hill ahead of Thursday's budget deadline. I knew I'd get him to laugh. House lawmakers expected to vote as soon as today on a short-term spending bill that would fund the government through mid-March. Remember, we're coming up on that next date, February 8th, where they could shut it down again. They would want to extend this. A year of defense spending would be part of it. House conservatives are pushing for legislation that would avoid leaving the military in limbo. Watch.
this particular plan. It's a good play call, and I'm sure it'll keep the government open that way and hopefully fund our military men and women for a full year. You know, obviously that's their choice, but, you know, that's going to be up to Democrats to decide whether they want to continue to keep our military men and women hostage. And if that's the choice they make, then certainly we'll have to deal with it on Wednesday or Thursday if the bill comes back.
But top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer is warning the House bill would be a dead-on arrival in the Senate.
Sending a cromnibus to the Senate, one that just funded defense and cut programs crucial to the middle class, would be barreling headfirst into a dead end. There's no way we'll reach an agreement that can pass the Senate. And it would jeopardize the positive discussions going on right now about the budget, disaster aid, immigration aid, immigration, and more.
And while Schumer was slamming the House plan, he says there has been some progress in Senate negotiations on a spending plan. You know, Judge, I heard you say cromnibus. Where are we going here? Yeah. February 8th sure did come fast.
It sure
We
did.
said it was going to.
It was just yesterday.
You know,
but they only had like 6 legislative days in their 17 days.
So think of the federal government as the largest, most expensive, biggest spender in the Western world. Could any corporation operate like this and expect to be successful?
It's appalling. They are the least efficient corporation of all time. Everyone on the board should be fired immediately. If I were a shareholder, I would sell hard.
We are shareholders.
We are shareholders.
I know. I wish I could
it's
get. I can't sell my shares.
Money. The federal government doesn't produce money. It takes our money and
spends it. This is like your next door neighbor that you kind of like but usually don't like, stealing your purse and going shopping.
Oh, it's like.
Why can't Schumer agree with Trump on a legitimate year-long budget?
So I actually think, well, they should work to agree on that. The bigger problem actually isn't Schumer, it's McConnell. That the Senate Republicans and the House Republicans are on very different pages in terms of what a stopgap measure should look like, whether it should be a year. And McConnell and Paul Ryan and Donald Trump are all 3 in different places. So the Democrats need to get on board, but the Republicans need to get their house in order.
Ask you a question, Lisa.
Attacks on all their houses.
People talk about, you know, I had Representative Gallagher on set with me last week, and he said, we should be working every weekend. We should be working all these extra hours. He said, I realize I'm new in Congress, and I'm like, you are new. You know, why aren't they around the clock? I
You're
mean,
like, come back in a year from now.
Yeah, right. Like, why aren't they there?
You know, it is a mess, and we have I understand that, but that is ultimately the problem at hand for Congress right now, is that it is hard for them to agree upon anything. But I will say, I do think that Democrats did themselves no favors in shutting down the government over DACA. Not only did 58% of Americans disagree with them, but I think they weakened their hand heading into more of these CR fights, as well as even looking ahead at the debt ceiling fight on
So I have a question. Who does it politically benefit to kick the can down the road on Dreamers and DACA? You know, I mean, even if they get a year military spending, that's better than, you know, a few days at a time. But who benefits from that?
I don't think anybody benefits from it. But the last time Schumer suffered from it. Maybe it's because of the way the president dealt with it, but Schumer was the GOAT the last time around.
Well, no, this is the swamp, though.
Not greatest of all time.
No.
You mean like a real GOAT.
But the question on DACA,
not Tom Brady GOAT, we're talking.
Tom Brady is no longer the GOAT.
Now,
the question on DACA, though, is this March deadline, the deadline I'll put in quotes, that President Trump put in place when he suspended the program. He has in the past seemed like he was open to extending that. So when you're talking about DACA, maybe there's more time, maybe there's not, but these are real people's lives that are sort of hanging in the balance.
There is more time because that deadline
legally
has been extended
no one's
by a federal judge.
against that case, but just politically now you've got Democrats who can say, well, we couldn't come to an agreement, but we're still working on it, and you have Republicans saying basically
done. That resonates with the American people.
Drop the mic there. We'll move on. If you've been watching the markets and wondering how your 401ks and retirement are doing, we have an expert on the couch.
Fox News alert for you right now. We are watching Wall Street after the Dow dropped more than 1,100 points yesterday. You remember that. That was the largest single-day point slide in history, not percentage. It wiped out the 2018 gains, falling below 25,000, dipping into correction territory if it had closed there. But while it was the biggest single-day point decline, we've seen much steeper percentage drops in the past. The White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley is not concerned.
The fundamentals of the American economy are really strong. We've seen, 7,000% increase in the stock market. We heard under the Obama administration that 1.9% GDP was the new normal, that manufacturing would never come back to our shores. All of those things have been turned around in under this president's policies, not to mention the fact GDP is now at hovering around 3% for the first time in the better part of a decade.
All right, two very important things to keep in mind. This is a reaction to good news, not bad news.
So what are they reacting to?
Normally when you see the market drop, because you see growth. You see growth out there, and that means that the Fed is probably going to tighten up. We might be seeing some inflation out here because of good things going on. Here's the thing to remember. The company, the stock that you liked a week ago, it's a heck of a lot cheaper now, but profits are still going up. It's a better deal because profits are going up. If I was allowed to buy stock, which I can't because of my job and my husband's job, man, that apple is looking delicious.
All right, so you said the Fed is going to tighten up. What you mean is the Fed might increase interest rates, which will make it more expensive for companies to borrow money, which will make it more expensive for them to run their businesses, which is going to lower their stock value.
No, well, I think first of all, they got a big tax break.
Right.
They have more money than they can use. I think the tightening of interest rates has to do with what you've seen in the Treasury market. That's one of the reactions and one of the normal computer trading algorithms is that when you see stocks go in one direction, bond yields go in the other direction. That's one thing we're reacting to. I think it's more meaningful, the interest rates for individuals, because as you have credit card debt or if you're locking in a home mortgage, I mean, if you're looking at one right now, lock that baby down, because we've had way too much loose free money through the entire last administration. Now it's getting pulled in and those chickens are coming home to roost. We have to pay the interest rate bill, but the economy is booming. That's what started this, and that's good news, not bad news.
The other thing that's happened that you can see, and you know this from polling, and you know this from the rise in balances on your MasterCard and your Visas across America, is that people feel not only just more confident about the economy, but they're beginning to do the one thing that we had a question mark about. When will Main Street feel some of what Wall Street is feeling?
That's a great point.
And so this is an answer back to that, and that actually is positive. Lisa?
Some of what we're seeing is inflation, which we're seeing in wages, which is great. That's what we've been asking for all along. Why is America, people are getting richer on Wall Street, but we're not seeing wages go up. Now we are seeing wages go up, and that's why the Dow and part is going down. This is more of an equalizing. This is great for Main Street. Go ahead, Lisa.
And I think that's also why we've seen a tightening on the generic bout as well. If you remember back in December, Republicans were losing by 15 points, which was incredibly concerning looking ahead at the 2018 midterm elections. And now there's only a 2-point deficit. They've been able to close that gap. So I think the calculations that Speaker Paul Ryan and Republicans made when they said that once Americans start seeing more take-home pay, once they start seeing the benefits of our tax reform law, their opinions on this are going to change, and their opinions about us are going to change. And I think we're seeing that. I mean, now the midterm elections are still really, really far away, so anything could change. But at least what we're seeing right now, I think their calculations were correct.
All right, we're going to move on, but I'll come to you first.
Fine.
President Trump is touting his tax plan. Remember, he was there in Ohio yesterday, and he went after Democrats at the same time. The president's once again calling out Representative Nancy Pelosi for referring to workers' bonuses as crumbs, comparing it to Hillary Clinton's deplorables gaffe. Watch.
So Nancy Pelosi again said that's crumbs. Well, she's a rich woman who lives in a big, beautiful house in California, who wants to give all of your money away. I think her statement, crumbs, will be equivalent, and I said this the other day for the first time. When I first heard the word deplorable, I thought it was a bad thing, but I had no idea it was not going to be good for our opponent.
The president also said Pelosi may be the GOP's secret weapon. He says the tax cut should pay dividends for Republicans in 2018 and in 2020.
She's our secret weapon. No, she's our secret. I just hope they don't change her. There are a lot of people that want to run her out. She's really out there. And I'm supposed to make a deal with her.
Pelosi fired back in a statement saying, quote, Republicans have been caught red-handed enriching their wealthy corporate donors at the expense of working families, and the American people recognize the tax scam for exactly what it is. Here's what is conflicting about this, Marie. People this week, and maybe even on Friday, began opening up their paychecks and seeing a big difference. For some of them, hundreds of dollars. So I'm wondering, where did Democrats find an economic message this time around? It's going to be harder because it's much more positive when they couldn't find it when things were not as positive last year.
Well, in a midterm election, as we've talked about a lot, it's really a district by district message. And there are a lot of districts in states like New York, New Jersey, California, Illinois, where people are not actually going to get more money this year because of the state and local tax issue, because of these very wealthy states not getting benefits in the same way that other states have. So in the midterm election, I actually think the Democratic Party has found candidates who match these districts. In the same way that Republicans always say to me, you can't just run against Donald Trump, you have to have a positive message. Republicans can't just run against Nancy Pelosi.
So wait a minute. Let me step in,
also need a positive message.
Hold on, Lisa. I want to make sure I understand you. So what you're saying is that the Democratic rebuttal to tax plan, job creation, positives for Republicans is to go to those 14 or so states that are missing their SALT taxes and try to drum up intensity there?
No, what I'm saying is that politically, Harris, you win back the House by getting, a couple dozen seats, and that there are a couple dozen seats in states that are not benefiting from the tax cut, enough for the Democrats to win. It's a political argument. Midterms are not about a national message. Midterms are about a district by district message, and the Democrats are outraising their counterparts on the ground across the board in these districts.
The president says he wants to run against Nancy Pelosi because he likes when she says these faux pas like crumbs. Isn't she the biggest fundraiser they have right now?
She is certainly one of them. But an interesting thing has emerged in the Democratic Party recently. You have younger Democrats like Joe Crowley, like Seth Moulton, who have formed their own fundraising organizations and are supporting younger candidates, particularly veterans.
But Nancy,
and those members, if they win, are going to owe their allegiance not to Nancy Pelosi, but to these other members.
You're right. District by district matters. I don't know if there's enough of the districts you talk about to make the 24-seat advantage.
There are in those
Democrats
states.
need.
There's 24, I think, in those states.
I'd have to look into that. I don't know that, but I also Nancy.